Matt Higgins is a founder, operator, investor, educator. No matter the role, he says he's always believed in trusting your instincts and never outsourcing your judgment. That mindset has led him down an unconventional path from poverty to investor. He grew up in Queens, hawking flowers on street corners and walking into McDonald's to put food on the table for his family. Then over the next decade, he earned a law degree from Fordham at Night, began a career as the youngest press secretary in New York City history, where he helped manage the global press response to the September 11th tragedy, and went on to become an executive for two NFL teams, found and invested in some of the most dynamic brands through RSE Ventures, and became a shark on ABC's Shark Tank, and also an executive fellow at Harvard Business School. So, Matt, what an amazing story that you have, and such a variety of experiences. Just start with that. Like, how did you get where you are?
Wow, thank you, by the way. Quite an intro. It's always nice to hear what my funeral might sound like, but no, I think actually, honestly, desperation. I grew up the product of extreme poverty. Those words lose their resonance, right? What does that mean? Eating government cheese, like you said, selling flowers on street corners, but more importantly, really trying to take care of a sick parent. Without healthcare, without access to help and support. So you go through these phases, fantasy, maybe some man's going to come and save us. And then eventually frustration, depression, and then defiance. And my whole career was born of defiance, of saying that, where I began will not dictate where I end up. And so I came up with a hack when I was a young kid, which was to drop out of high school. And parents, close your ears, and kids. But the bottom line is, back in the day, if you took a GED and you did well enough, you could actually go to any college in America. And my objective was to get a higher paying job. And that was my burn the boats moment, which I wrote this book about, which is, in order for me to go through with this radical plan that I was sure was correct for myself and everyone else said was crazy, I needed to self-sabotage. I needed to eliminate my retreat or burn the boats. And I did that by failing every single class in high school, except for typing. And I'm still type 100 words a minute today. And I went forward with it. And the rest is history. And I tapped into what Warren Buffett talks about in the financial context, which is compounding as the most important financial principle. Compounding applies equally to your career too. So by fast forwarding all this professional achievement, it gave me extra years to reap exponential return. So I wrote this book to try to share that formula with everyone else.
It's amazing.
You could have, Matt, you had every reason not to be successful. You had every reason, instead of hawking flowers on a street corner, to dealing drugs, doing drugs, laying on the couch. Woe is me. Where the heck did that drive come from?
That's a great question. It's interesting. One could look at it saying I have every reason to sort of throw in a towel and lie on the couch. I look at it like I had every reason not to do those things. I actually always think somebody who has wealth and comfort and has every reason not to do lay on the couch because things are going to be okay. So for me, it was the sense that I needed to do something about it. I don't know exactly where the drive came from. I think that is what my one God-given gift. I always think nature versus nurture. Part of it came from my mother, though, frankly. I could come with the most improbable plan you could imagine. The one person in my life who didn't call me a loser, which my teacher did, or my guidance counselor sort of painting a very grim picture. The one person in my life who agreed in this idea was my mother. And that's part of what motivated me with this book, thinking we tell our kids that it's prudent to have a plan B. And what we're actually really signaling to them is it's not safe. And the reason we conjure plan B is to ameliorate the pain of wanting something so bad. When I told my mother I was going to drop out of high school so I can get a better paying job and help us, put food on the table, she's like, you'll figure it out. That makes sense. I mean, and despite the dysfunction of poverty, my mother had a, high IQ. So it's not like, this is a byproduct of everything else going around us. She just had faith that if I went all in on something, I would figure it out. But I think it's my God-given gift to be just a little bit defiant.
I love that philosophy. I'll figure it out.
In investing, anyone who's a VC or an investor who's written checks before knows exactly what I'm talking about. When you come across someone, no matter what the Excel sheet says or the model says or the PowerPoint says, that when they leave the room, you're like, I don't totally get it, but I think Bob's going to figure it out or Mary's going to figure it out. Those people always win. And so I think it's very hard to instill in somebody listening to this, but if you could cultivate your ability at really more your belief that no matter what happens to you, you're just going to figure it out. Now that takes some reps. Dropping out of high school is a pretty radical thing to do. And if things work out, we're sitting here talking, so obviously they did, that gives you a lot of confidence that you're always just going to figure it out.
How can resiliency is a big topic in the workplace, in our country. People have had it pretty nice, and then you have bad reps on different generations, the millennials, the Generation Z. How do you build resiliency? Can you teach it? Can you coach it? Can you develop it as a business owner in your team?
Yeah, I think you do. I think it starts with, and this defies the current political climate in our country in a lot of respects, but I think the victim narrative is poison. If you ingest the victim narrative and you make it part of your identity, and it happens through osmosis all around you, the victim narrative is a self-fulfilling prophecy to have a life that you're going to look back on, like, what happened? How did I squander it? It's because someone convinced you that you were a victim. And I just think no one is destined to be a victim. We are victimized throughout the course of our life, and that requires empathy and compassion and understanding. But I've never been a victim. I've never meant to be a victim. And so the first thing is to convince people, like, you're buying into it and it's not going to help you. It's not going to get you anywhere. And then to convince people that from every failure that you experience, you're able to extract more than what was taken from you. I approach every single bad thing that's happened to me, even the death of my mother. As horrendous as my mother died the first day I was press secretary to the mayor of New York, I went from $375 an hour scraping gum at McDonald's to $100,000 a year in a decade. The CAGR of that's pretty crazy, right? From a compounding. And then she dies that morning. If my mother was sitting here on this interview right now, she would say, as much as I would have preferred to live longer, I instilled in you compassion and a commitment to ameliorate suffering that resulted in so many people getting college scholarships, single mothers, because I was inspired. So many different things I've done, working with the Pope, to support migrants and refugees. And so a long way of saying to you, first, reject the victim narrative, and two, believe that every crisis you can extract more than what was taken from you.
That's powerful. And I think of a quote from Nelson Mandela. He says, "I never lose. I either win or I learn." And I think it's all about.
You said, I always say I'm not, whenever we're in a kind of a contentious situation in the investment standpoint, business standpoint, and somebody has so horrifically wronged me. A partner once said to me, he goes, why are you not vengeful? Like, we got to get vengeance. I was like, to be honest, it's because I always win. So like, I don't have any room for that, because first of all, I want to save space for grace and compassion. But two, it's like, it's just going to work out. And that is if that is your frame of mind, it ends up being inevitably true.
How do you incorporate, grace with winning? Like, some people, I've been around some of the best, Michael Jordan, you want to punish the opponent. The grace is hard to mix in with the competitiveness, that balance, that nuance. How do you do that? How do you find that sweet spot between winning and grace?
I think it begins by making sure that the only one you're ever really competing with is yourself and your ideal of yourself. And I always think about horses with, the blinders on, right? And if you just sort of approach things that way, then you are not, amplifying the enemy, or, it really is. And that's truly how I look at it. I actually think I have a strange relationship with competition, maybe because I was never in sports. I never competed. Like, I just almost feel like I don't want to be bothered with that. I am competing with me. You do your thing, I'll do my thing. That also enables you to be more empathetic and don't feel like you have to step on people's throats. Also, I have a philosophy of proportionate violence. In other words, sometimes violence is necessary. I mean, violence rhetorically speaking, right? Like, you need to push back when you're dealing with somebody who's doing something wrong, somebody who's taking something from you, somebody who's trying to hurt you. You need to be capable of being able to meet that person where they are. But I never go further than necessary to get to a draw. And that might be contradictory. You got to step on somebody's throat. I never do more than necessary to align at a draw, and then give somebody another shot at redemption. I think that's how you save space for grace.
How do you build a team around you? How do you find the talent? How do you evaluate the talent? And then how do you define their roles?
Yeah, I think for me, the activity, since we're more of an investment and holding company, I talk about the underlying investments and the leaders of those companies. What I look for most in a successful founder is self-awareness. I mean, setting aside table stakes of intellect and vision, obviously, right? But when we're drilling down to whether or not, despite all those things, somebody's going to be successful, I look for self-awareness. Why self-awareness? Because people who over-index on self-awareness have a greater propensity to course correct before the universe imposes the necessity upon them. In other words, there's a certain kind of person that has to actually see the iceberg right in front of them before to avert it, or there's somebody who is looking for the iceberg. And most icebergs are, to extend the metaphor, are within. Right, they're right below the, you know how an iceberg, most of it's below the surface, right? Most danger is within us. Our inability to take criticism, our whatever trauma or baggage we carry. And so I look for people who over-index for self-awareness because they will make their own interventions rather than be like, oh, Matt's got to call you up to tell you your company is about to fall apart or all your staff is quitting. Right. Those people will make their own intervention. So then the next question is, oh, that sounds great. How do you spot it? How do you cultivate it? I'll just talk about how you cultivate it. I believe that when you share your vulnerabilities, when you make a gift of your grief and talk about things that are even just a tad bit cringy, like I do in my book, what you're doing is you're modeling that it's safe, especially at my level, right? I talk about how when I went on Shark Tank, greatest thing in my life, right? Kid from Queens, eating government cheese. Now I'm on the set of Shark Tank with Mark Cuban, right? I was a pathetic mess when I went on that show. I thought for sure Mark Cuban would see right through those eyes and see the government cheese or see my bank account, right? I had imposter syndrome. Now, when you watch the tape of me on Shark Tank, you would conclude that I was probably a natural at TV. If I don't share this story, then I haven't made a gift of what I went through. But now by sharing this story, somebody out there, one, they might be cringing. And the two, they might be judging me. Oh, if I was on Shark Tank, I would kill it. I wouldn't even be nervous. Oh, good for you then. You're better than me. You have what it takes to be on Shark Tank. Or three, I felt that too. And I'm glad to be seen and heard. Now I can open up. And that is the only tactic that I know to cultivate self-awareness, is to make little deposits of vulnerability that other people feel like you shouldn't share. And when I wrote my book, even now when I look at my book, sometimes I'm like, oh, I wrote that. Or when somebody asks me a question, I'm like, oh, that's in there, and I remember like, okay, why'd you do that, Matt? Oh, you did it because you were trying to model vulnerability and let somebody know, hey, you can talk about your divorce. You can talk about the fact that your divorce brought you to your knees. Doesn't make you less than. And then put that one page in there. That's how you cultivate self-awareness.
How do you interview for it though? How do you like, do you use assessments? Do you ask behavioral type questions? Do you check referrals? How do you interview for it?
That's a great question. I look for proxies of EQ, and they're verbal, and I have a bunch, but just to get to the most obvious one, people who over-index on the use of the word I in an interview or any kind of situation where you're attempting to receive a benefit. If you over-index, it shows me, first of all, it shows me who you really are. Like you're probably a narcissist, maybe a sociopath, or maybe just really egotistical. But what more importantly it shows me is that you're not self-aware, because you should realize, at least as a tool of manipulation, you should not be using I. You should be showing graciousness and showing we. So there are a bunch of verbal cues that people use that show they are not self-aware. I'll give you another one. If you are in a context where you're trying to get an investment, or you're getting an interview, if you change your opinion very quickly in order to agree with me, that shows that you don't have strong conviction or that you're very manipulative. Again, self-awareness would be like, I probably should hold fast to my views because I'm comfortable in my own skin. And by the way, I'm going to be judged anyway as someone who doesn't have strong conviction. So those are two little hacks. Now, anybody who's interviewing me, like, okay, don't say I.
That's right.
and make sure I never agree with you.
Yeah.
That's right. But I love it. I mean, I could go on and on. Imposter syndrome, being vulnerable. I'm a Vistage chair and executive coach, and we talk about being vulnerable all the time, modeling that behavior. We talk about imposter syndrome. It's lonely at the top. We talk about self-awareness. One thing we're talking right now, being year end, is strategic planning. So you have all these companies. How do you plan for 2024? How do you say, I think sales should be up 20%. Well, why 20%? Why'd you pick 20%? Is that fair to the team? Will it disincentivize them? How do you and your team strategically plan for the upcoming year?
That's such a great question. A few things get in the way. I'm sure everybody, even if you run a company or you're dealing with that, like I always tell my team, we must ensure that we are not dealing with a crisis past the first week of December, because we need the brain space, one, to enjoy the holiday as humans, but two, so that we can have space for planning. And then somebody always screws that up. There's always that one company. It's like, oh man, we didn't plan our cash flow. And we're cash out by like the first week of January. True story, by the way. Two of these scenarios. So the long story, the first part is like culturally, you should try to make sure that you are not dealing with any episodic crisis past the first weeks of December. That's number one. Number two, I hunt down hope. I'm always hunting down hope. You know, hope is great in your personal life. We all need it. We don't know why we're here. We don't know where we're going. So we need a degree of hope and faith, right? In the business context, it's horrendous and it's very destructive. And so I am constantly scanning, the portfolio and looking for the assumptions that are built on hope and not data, and attacking them violently, because those are what are getting in on long-term planning. So I literally will go through this exercise, like, all right, so what are you presuming will happen in 2024 in order for that? Well, the Fed's going to cut rates in the first half. I mean, 5 rate cuts already baked in. I'm like, that is total nonsense, because their target is 2% inflation and unemployment right now is at 3.7% as we're filming this. Show me the data that actually points to the fact. Just because the market is factoring that in with a 40% probability, like if the market's wrong, you will not be able to refinance your debt. We are doomed. That's called hope. So a lot of what I'm doing is trying to engaging people through knowledge. I obviously collect a ton of information, right? And confront those challenges, but it all boils down to that fact that hope is not a business strategy.
Yeah.
And on the final 10 minutes or so, can we talk about the book?
Yeah, let's talk about the book. I think we
Let's
kind of
talk
are.
about-
I think we kind of are talking about the book without talking about the book. Actually, most of it is in the book.
What book?
Yeah,
No.
what book?
So
Where is
I guess we've got a bit of an overview. This is your philosophy,
Yeah.
right? In your life.
Right.
And I mean, what can people glean from this book?
Well, the book is a little bit of an inside joke, if I'm honest, starting with the cover, right? If you look at the cover, do I go there? Yeah, there it is. If you look at the cover, this bombastic phrase, burn the boats, right? And I've always been fascinated by why people hesitate. And the fact that this phrase kept coming up in different contexts, including with Rex Ryan, the head coach of the Jets, who I worked with. And he gave this speech to the players when we were in a losing skid, all about Cortez in 15-19. And these young kids went out and they beat the crap out of the Steelers. And when they gave interviews, they're all like, it's because of this guy Cortez. He burned the boats. And so this phrase has come up throughout the course of my life. When I started researching this phrase and this idea of why humans hesitate, why don't we fully commit, what I found is that the idea and this phrase and this tactic has been used since the beginning of recorded history. Every culture has the burn the boats hero who, when their back was against the wall and they were literally in a life or death situation, they self-sabotage. And yet that contradicts everything we're told as kids and in business, that you need a backup plan. And what I found is when I started researching a great landmark study out of Wharton in 2014 that found that merely contemplating plan B while you're pursuing your plan A, just thinking about it, is enough to do 2 things. One, statistically less likely to be successful than the group that didn't. Interesting. You would think the safety net would make you more calm and confident. And 2, it made you measurably less intrinsically motivated to achieve your goal. So the researchers said, why is that? And what they found is sequence matters. When you think about risk mitigation, determines everything. You want to think about risk mitigation before you fully commit, so that you're not always looking over your shoulder while you're going all in on plan A. So the reason why I say it's an inside joke is you could read this book and be like, oh, it's all bombastic, burn the boats, to hell with everybody. No, it's the opposite. The burn the boats, the boat is a metaphor for all the things in our lives that we carry that beckon us to retreat from our true purpose. Imposter syndrome, anxiety. For me, it was shame around not being able to save my mom, and poverty, and not knowing which fork to use at the dinner table, no refinement, all the things I carried with me. So it's a compilation of ideas and strategies and tactics around how to fully commit to plan A. And not only through me as the vessel, but through Scarlett Johansson and Rex Ryan and all these tender stories I share of people sharing the metaphorical boat in their life that they needed to burn in order to go all in.
Yeah, it resonates. It probably resonates with all of us. I try to I was a backup plan guy. I mean, I was in college. I was played basketball at North Carolina, and I had a summer internship on Wall Street, thinking if it didn't work out, I would work on Wall Street. It didn't work out, and I worked on Wall Street. I hated it, and I went back to basketball. And then when I was coaching basketball, there was no other backup plan. That was it. And so it really is very, very powerful. How are you burning boats now?
Well, and I think just to get on that point real quick, the reason why I wrote the book and I feel like I was the right one to write this book is that doesn't come easy for me or naturally. My book is my accountability partner.
Right.
Like, because I have dealt with anxiety all my life. I've dealt with the trauma of everything I went through. And the reality is I have learned to catalyze that anxiety in order to be able to propel me to greater heights. And the way I do that is a simple 4-step risk mitigation process that I undertake every time I go through it. And to just distill it, it's thoroughly analyzing what's the worst that's going to happen. It's
Right.
the anxiety of unlitigated, damage. So what am I doing now? How am I burning the boats? I'm burning the boats for this book because every day I wake up from a DM from somebody on earth who feels seen by my book, who doesn't say, oh, here's some middle-aged rich white guy on Shark Tank who possibly can't connect with me, and say, oh, because of the details I share in the book, they feel like they can meet me somewhere, and now they're receptive to the message. Every day I wake up from somebody who's made a radical change in their life that they wouldn't have made if they didn't read the book. I'm never the genesis. I don't install the idea, but I give permission to pursue the idea. And so I don't think anything I've done in my life or my career, and maybe ever will do, is more important than me getting this book out, because I'm looking at the impact it's making every day on people's lives. And it's pretty amazing. And it's what I set out to do with this book, but now seeing it actually happening. So the answer is I burned the boats for my book. I actually took the Chinese phrase that means burn the boats from 206 BC. It's Po Fu Chen Zhou. And I had it tattooed all the way down my arm so that I don't forget.
Did you really? Did you really?
I can show it to you if you want to see it.
Yeah. That is very Queens right there.
It is
getting
quite
a
well. I'm
tattoo.
going to show it. I'm going to show how we do it. It is very,
Okay,
here it
let's
is.
see.
Oh, wow.
That's
It's
awesome.
not to see, and everyone's like, oh, I thought you would just get like a little thing. I was like, no, the burn the boats guy can't get like a little tattoo. It's got to be down my whole room.
Well, it's the kind of thing that survives you too. I mean, it's like, a great classical piece of music that Beethoven wrote, we still listen to today. People are going to be reading your books for.
No, thank you. And the reason why the tattoo is important is it's another teaching moment to show that just because you have insights and wisdom doesn't mean that you're able to institute them yourselves. To be human is 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Even for me, I put this on my arm, so that every day I'm in the mirror, I said, commit. You said you were going to commit. And that's what all of us have to do. So I think the problem with Instagram culture is everything is packaged and airbrushed, and it's like you make people feel like you've got it figured out and they don't. And that creates separation. So I'm always trying to lower myself by virtue of the book and my tattoo to show that even I have to work on commitment.
What is the thing you've done? So many amazing things. I mean, I really, when I read your book, I just had to get, I was going to get you on an interview, sooner or later, because it's just an amazing story. What's the thing you may be most proud of?
This is more abstract. I think when we go through terrible things in our lives, my upbringing, everybody's got something, right? We have 2 choices to make. You're going to get the other side of that, and you're going to say, you know what? No one gave me anything. I walked 5 miles to school. You will too, son. Right? Or you could say, because I didn't have this thing, I know how impactful that thing would have been by virtue of its absence, if only I had it. And I'm going to try to provide that from someone else because I could imagine the impact it's going to make. So it's a long way of saying I provide scholarships for single mothers because I know what it was like to be a single mom watching my mother trying to transcend her circumstances, how hard it is to survive and aspire at the same time. And so I think that the most impactful thing is the choice I made, which is the greatest impact I can make in life is to ameliorate suffering. And I'm not going to be bitter, and I'm going to save space for empathy, and I'm going to do little things like those little scholarships or anything else.
Wow. Is there a question that we should have asked that we didn't?
No, I think this was fantastic. I mean, you should have asked me to show you the tattoo, and then I did it anyway. So other than that, I think we covered.
I'm glad you did.
I was glad it was on your arm.
Yeah.
I know it's not, I wanted it down there. My wife is like, not, you can't show it in speeches. So yeah.
Well, I mean, I think this is a great story of kind of the mechanics of business data, but then also the emotion human side of it too. I mean, it's a really interesting combination of
Yeah,
both.
no, and I think lastly, just to leave everyone, I mean, I know this to be true, and anyone who's done something really great, Bezos and Musk will tell you that the greatest innovations and breakthroughs are gut sandwiches. They begin with an intuition in your gut. You try to buttress it with some degree of data and validation, but at the end of the day, the green light comes from intuition. And where people get stuck is they think data is going to give them the green light. And the reason why data doesn't is that opportunity arrives before the tipping point of evidence. When something's an opportunity, there isn't a lot of validation for it. There isn't a lot of data for it. And that should make you excited. Instead, people will go to their best friend and be like, what do you think? And they're like, I think you're crazy. And then your dream dies. So I just want to leave you with this idea. Remember gut sandwich. If you got a great insight, at the end of the day, there shouldn't be a lot of data to support it. There shouldn't be a lot of validation to agree with you. And you just got to go based on instinct.
That's where the magic is. So in business. Thank you so much, Matt. Wonderful to meet you, hear about the book and hear your story. And thank you as always, Matt Doherty.
That was awesome. Matt Higgins, thank you so much. I'm a big fan.
Thank you so much.
Good luck with everything and the sale of your book.